Welcome everybody. My name is Denise Dias. I work for the Johnson County Extension Office, and it's been a great partnership to work with the Olathe Quilters Guild the last couple of years. And Mary Pacey is your person that I've been contacting with about programs for the public and also for guild members. So tonight's topic is really pretty popular. We had almost 40 people register for the class the last I checked. So we're real excited to have Cindy Nice share her talents with us tonight. And so I'm going to turn it over to her. If you can mute your microphone, that would be great. So we don't hear any, dogs barking or, phones or anything. And then if you have a question, there is a box at the bottom of your screen. It says chat, and you can click on that and type in your questions, and Cindy will answer them. She'll stop and pause a couple of times to make sure that everybody understands what's happening and going on, and she can answer them kind of through her presentation then. So anyway, without further ado, I'm gonna Cindy share her screen a little bit and go from there. So,
do we need to do anything on this end, or we're good? You're good.
I'm making you the host, so you should be able to do what you need to do to share your screen so people can see it.
Okay. We assume that we're already there, are we not?
Everybody can see Cindy. Ah. Can you see her, everybody, in the full view? If not, there is a button at the top that says speaker view. So you might want to click on that so you can see Cindy full screen, okay?
We see you full screen.
All right. Okay, Cindy, we'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Good evening. So happy to have you all with us tonight. We are in my basement, and I have lots of help. My son is running the techie stuff because that's what he's good at. And my husband and my oldest grandson, Alex, Stan is my son, Alex is his son. They're going to be quilt holders. We're going to start by showing you some samples of different quilts. And this one is one that I made a lot of years ago for Glenn. And most of these were his t-shirts. I think that I ran out of some, I needed one more, like that, Mr. Nice Guy, isn't that cute? Anyway, and I went to the thrift store and bought another one. So that's always an option if you don't have quite enough. And I'll show you another option in a little while. And you know how they always say that you should sign and date all your quilts? Can you see this? Am I in a good place, Stan? I can't see what I'm looking.
Move it a little here.
But I can't see what.
I got it.
Okay, so this is done with the embroidery machine, and this quilt obviously was done in 2006. And I put it in the corner, in these cornerstones. I don't always put cornerstones in the border, but in this case I did. And then I put down here, I put my name, so it's signed and dated. You see that? And then his name is here. And I was in California, but we were moving to Kansas, so I put the Kansas wheat on it. And then I wanted to show you one more thing right here. This was the t-shirt, and these are broderie purse, cut out of fabric and appliqued on. So that's another thing that you can add to it to like just spice it up a little bit. So that's that one. Can we have the next one? And then t-shirt quilts made for schools, for the school t-shirts, is a really, really popular thing. This one hung in my classroom in Brea, California for several years. And you notice that it's only 6, because you can do it in any number you want. But these are 2 different quilts, 2 different t-shirts. This is off of 4 different ones. This one was a sleeve that I embroidered. VOHS was the initials of the school. So I did it that way. And these are the colors of the school, the green and gold. So that's a pretty common way to do those things. Kids like it with their colors. Next. This next one I made when I was teaching at Frontier Trail Middle School in Olathe, and those colors were navy and red and gray, and the mascot is Jaguar. So that's why I chose the fabrics I did. And you'll notice that sometimes I'm not crazy about lots of empty space. So sometimes I cut them off smaller and I add fabric, because you can never use too much fabric. And see this one right here that has, so here's more. So you always can do that kind of stuff to fill up some space, to just add more interest. And then the other thing that I really like doing, I loved this one, was my daughter-in-law, Alex's mom, asked me would I do his baby clothes from the first year of his life. So that's where these came from. So these bits and pieces, do you see how I pieced the sashing instead of making it whole? So that's another possibility, which means I guess I technically have cornerstones, but not really, because I just put the yellow in that same position. And Alex is 14 now, so it's been a while since I made this. But you see that I put, this is the back of one of his shirts, and I embroidered his name on it. And just a second. See this? This has pockets. You see that? And the little placket and with the buttons. And well, I just left it all on. And this was a shirt that I did an embroidery on with my embroidery machine as well. This one still has the buttons. It was a Hawaiian shirt. So we left the pocket. Do you see that? We left all that. And then down here, yes, right here, we did when he was born, how much he weighed and how long he was. So you can add those things. Now I have an embroidery machine, so that's the way I do it because I'm lazy, but obviously you could do this with hand embroidery as well. Okay. So do you see that everything is just a little bit different? This one is one of the most recent ones I've made. I made it this summer for my 10-year-old grandson. And his mother has been collecting, he liked superhero shirts, right? And his mother has been collecting them since he was a baby. So what do you do when you get things that there's so many different sizes? It becomes very difficult. So instead of making squares in a grid, I did columns. Do you see this? I have columns, and I put, this Spider-Man is his favorite, a superhero. So that was my focus fabric, and we did red, white, and blue. But some things were too narrow because he was a little bitty kid. And so we just stuck them all together like that. And when I got it all done, you see at the bottom how we we compensated for the differences by filling in. Do you see that? And I did it every other one. I did these on the bottom, and I did the other two, the opposite ones on the top. But also, then I got all done, and I had one whole space that I didn't have. It just didn't fit. So I made a block out of red, white, and blue, out of the bits and pieces that, you see, I've got all these extra pieces of, I just used solid, it's Kona cotton that I used for the solids. And then I put it together with the stars on the between the columns. So that's another way of coping when you have a lot of things that are different colors or different sizes. All right. Now the last one is this. This is another opportunity. Do you remember 9/11? I'm sure you all remember that. They had a lot of t-shirts that they were putting out at that time. And so we just bought them. And these were all printed on white backgrounds, which is unusual that you have everything that's that consistent. But we went ahead and I made two at the time, and I gave one away to a good friend. But this is the other one, and we kind of like that. The thing I want to point out on this is the choice of fabrics, and you want your big print usually is going to go on the outside because it detracts from, you just want to frame your shirts. That's the focus. So you want to frame your shirts, and you want to put the big stuff out here and just make it all blend. So that's the show and tell part. So Denise, any questions yet? No? How come I can't hear Denise?
Sorry, I need to unmute myself.
Oh, sorry.
I muted everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Denise, any questions yet?
We just have a comment. Sounds like someone's having some technical issues. So, her screen is frozen. So
Right.
if you're having issues, make sure that you mute and you turn off your video. That helps to allow the bandwidth to increase. So, okay.
No.
Good. Carry on, Cindy.
Back we come. All right. So if you got this, if you printed this off of the description of the class, I'm just going to follow it. So hopefully that'll help you keep track of where we are. So number of t-shirts required. That's why I gave you this grid. This is just standard. If you make it 12 t-shirts, that does like a single bed quilt. And a lot of kids I've made a lot of quilts for people who take all their high school quilts and they want to take it to college with them. And when they do that, it's 12. And sometimes they want their high school colors for the fabric, and sometimes they want their college where they're going. So that's always something that you can do. And my rule is anything you can grid, you can make a t-shirt quilt. You saw the one that had 6. You can also do you could do 3, you could do 2, you could do 1 and make a pillow out of it. And that's, if you've just got one special one. This one that I'm working on tonight has 9. And the reason it has 9 is because that's how many shirts I had. I actually had 10, but we did 9. All right, so that's the deal with number of t-shirts. And then washing. When somebody brings me t-shirts, I always wash them, whether they've washed them or not. Hopefully there's something that are well worn and they've been washed a lot, because that makes life easier for you always, because having them washed a lot, it's less likely they're gonna shrink anymore. It's less likely that they're going to bleed. So the other thing is, I always wash it with a color catcher. And I also suggest that when you wash your quilt after it's made, that you also use color catchers, because you have tons of different colors. Is usually, I mean, this is a rarity that you have all the same backgrounds. So usually you have lots of different, and some things, bleed and some things don't. So I always recommend, I recently made 3 quilts for a client within the last month, and used the color catchers. When she came to pick them up, I told her, I washed them, I used color catchers. Every single batch bled a little, and I said, I suggest that you tell your kids, they were for her kids, that they wash them all the time with the color catchers. But you want, the reason you do that is you want this quilt to be washable. You don't want to have to worry about the fact that they're going to fade and bleed together and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm a big believer in color catchers. And the other thing is that you want to be sure that you use no fabric softener. And the reason for no fabric softener is because the adhesion of the interfacing is better if there's no fabric softener. So you wash them, you dry them, no fabric softener, and color catchers. So that's the washing. And then we're on to what I call the rough cutting. So I saved a t-shirt. Here it is. All right. And there are a couple ways to do this, but I'm going to show you what I consider the easy way. And I'll take the t-shirt and I'll cut the sleeves out. Now, if you're uncomfortable using a rotary cutter, by all means, use your scissors. I did scissors for years, and then I became more comfortable with the rotary. So there's one sleeve, there's 2 sleeves, and then I like to line it up as close as I possibly can. Sometimes there are side seams, but it seems like more and more there aren't any. So if you have to err towards the back if you're going to use the front. But of course, some things you use the back. It just depends on how it's printed. There you go. There's one. Now we'll do this side. And then you got to do the top. I could have had this all done, but I know some people like to actually see it. And all these places, I could have used my trusty scissors. They work great. I used to sit in the, while I watch TV and cut everything apart, but I found this is a lot faster. All right, so this is loose, almost. All right, so this is the piece I'm going to use. This piece makes excellent dust rags, shop rags. My art teacher friend said, she gave me some of these fronts, and she said, but can I have the backs and the sleeves back, because she uses it to polish her jewelry in her jewelry making class that she teaches. So this is where we are now. That is the cutting. That's the rough cutting. And now we're going to come right here, stabilize it. Now, when you are stabilizing, a couple of things. Sometimes there are, you know, it just depends on what your shirt is, but some of them, even especially like, I don't know, especially some sports things, they'll have that rubbery kind of letters and names and things like that. And sometimes they stick to, you know, when you iron it, they'll stick to the ironing board. Well, you really don't want that. So oftentimes I will take one of the backs and I'll put it down to save my ironing board cover. And the other thing, if you don't want to do that, parchment paper works great, just like when you bake and things don't stick to it, parchment paper, but you do want to protect. All right, now we're going to talk about fusible interfacing. This one is my favorite, all right? It is Shapeflex SF101 and made by Pellon. The last time I bought it, it was $6.99 a yard, and you need a half a yard for each shirt. Pretty much that's the way you have to figure it out to buy your stuff, is half a yard per. Well, the reason I like this the best is because it is woven. And when you put it on, when you apply it, then the t-shirt acts just like another piece of regular cotton fabric, and it'll stretch a little. If you know, it'll give a little when you're easing stuff in. And that was really, really important, especially when I was new to this and when I was a newer quilter. And I would buy a bolt of it at Joann's with a 50 or a 60% off coupon. And that's just the way I did it. Since then, since it's gotten so expensive, and I know a lot of other people have used this lightweight, it's not woven, and it also is Pellon, and this is P44F, and it says apparel interfacing, and the last time I bought it, it was 99 cents a yard. I don't know how old this is, so forgive me for that, I don't know. So also, you can tell I buy things by the volt for this kind of stuff. I don't like it as much, but I was determined to find a less expensive alternative so that we didn't have to spend quite so much money on the interfacing part. So the last couple I've done have been done with this, and that's what I did on this one. So there are a couple things, couple different choices. And of course, when you iron it on, make sure this is still on. When you iron it on, you want to read your directions. Now, having said that, I'll tell you, I'm still in range, right? I already cut this, and this is cut, I think it's like 20 inches wide. Yeah, 20 inches wide, and I cut them at 17, I believe. And the reason I did 17 was because I had already decided that my blocks were going to be cut at 15. So I put it up as far as I can up to the neckline, because the designs are always on the upper part. And so you always have issues with, see, this one fills, but you see how there's room underneath all of these. So that's why you want to get as high up as you can. And then it says, I think the directions say to put this on like medium steam. Well, I'm a big believer in steam. I love that. But I will tell you that I don't believe in medium. You do whatever you want. used to tell my kids, I put the iron on scorch and then I put it on. And did you notice that I kind of went from the more of the center towards the out, and you want to go up and down. You do not want to go back and forth because you move things. And I think it's said to do like 15 seconds. Well, that's forever. And you're supposed to move it, move it, move it. 15 seconds in each place. Since I'm on scorch, it doesn't really take quite that long. So you still want it to adhere nicely, because you don't want it to come loose in your quilt. You don't want it to come loose while you're stitching it. None of those things. All right, let's go back over here where I started. Now that it's adhered, I can iron it down. Iron it out from the center. And remember, I've got a hotter iron than it says to do. And I can do that because I have a cotton t-shirt. If you have a mixed blend t-shirt, then you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. You're going to have to lower your temperature somewhat. And my rule on that is that anything that you can stabilize, you can put in your quilt. So I do, I think it's like the soccer jerseys that are a different fabric. Most of the other things are like cotton, but some of those jerseys, if they have too many holes in them, then you're gonna have to figure out something else to maybe bond it to, or just cut out the logo part and use that. So that's my rule. If I can stabilize it, I can put it in your quilt. If I can't stabilize it, I really can't. So do you see how nice and flat that is? And then on the front, it also is nice and flat. My steam was spitting a little. I just got that new iron and it said that it wouldn't spit, but can't believe everything. All right, so now I'm ready to cut. And there are a couple ways. This is a 12.5-inch ruler. And you easily could, this particular quilt, I could use the 12.5 and cut around it. And it's got all these lines so you can center it nicely. And I just get up here as far as I can and I don't worry about down here. However, the way you determine what your quilt, if you're gonna do a grid, which all of these that you saw except the Spider-Man one have all been grids. So that means they all have to have the same amount. They have to be the same. So what I do is I take my big ruler and I look at them and I decide I figure out which one has the biggest logo, the biggest emblem, and I measure that. So plus you have to have your seam allowance. So I measure that. This one was the biggest, so it's 15. So 15 inches is what my squares are. So that's the way I figure them. A couple of ones that I made last month, the man had a lot of big logos, and I had to cut those at 15. And these were probably cut at 14. So it doesn't matter what size, you just have to figure it out and make it. Then when you're getting ready to cut, I always use my long ruler. That just works for me. And just FYI, I put press and seal on the back so it doesn't slide around on me. Just a little tip. So I take whatever I can find. like this has words, and some of these have words, some of them have designs, but whatever you can find that can be a straight, then I line it up with one of my lines. Can you see that? And then I cut it off. That's now no longer part of the quilt. And then I need 15 inches. I use the grid on my mat. I know different people have different ways of cutting. This is my way of cutting. So I've got that. I've got one straight edge. So now I'm going to go down. No, I'm not either. I'm going to cut off a little bit of the sides. And the reason I do that is it depends on what size your quilt is, your fabric, your t-shirts. But if it's too big, I can't see all my lines, and I need to see all my lines. I need to be able to see all the way across. So here we go. We're going to line up on one of my straight lines. And then I'm going to measure 15. And my mat is really old, so I'm trying not to use my 0 because it's old and that's a real groove there. So here we go. You know, measure carefully, make sure you didn't move anything. Slice it off. There we go. Now we have 2 sides, and the next 2 sides become even easier. You see, I'm lining it up with my grid. All right. I have been known to try to find the middle. Do you see that? That I is the middle. So what is half of 15? Where's Alex? Did he leave me? He's my math person. Okay, well, we all know that half of 15 is 7.5. So I'm going to put that right there on the 15. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it, you know, all the way big. This is just a shortcut. So I'm going to measure 7.5. That goes to right here. I'm going to cut both of these at the same time. Sometimes it's harder to do this, but with lots of printing, it makes it easier. All right. So there's my block. You see that? There's my block. Now, you will notice that there's a lot of empty space down here. Do you see that? Lots of empty space, which is fine. And you saw in some of them, I whacked it off and I put, you know, 2 patches and piano keys and, you know, different things across here, which is, you know, this is your quilt. You get to do it your way. I decided that I wanted to fill up some of the space because I think I told you before that I don't like a lot of empty space like this. So let's see. Oh, if you're not comfortable with a rotary and the way I just did it, you certainly can take your pencil and your ruler and you can draw your lines and then cut it out with scissors. That's perfectly acceptable. That's the way I used to do with the kids because I didn't let them use the rotaries when they were really young and inexperienced. All right, so we did that. Now we're going to talk about fabric choices. All right, so when I was choosing fabric for this, you see that we have all kinds of colors. Well, I decided that I wanted a girly quilt because I usually make, you know, like neutral and boy quilts. And I decided this was quilting, I could make a girly quilt. So I chose this because it has, look at all the colors it has, and it goes with all of the blocks. It has all those colors in it. It has tons of colors. Well, remember what I said, that I like to have the biggest print on the outside, and then I like to frame the inside. This is what the sashing and the cornerstones, that's what holds the whole quilt together, and that's what gives you the cohesion. So you can have anything, and if you put it together like this, it all looks like it blends. Even though when you have the stack of t-shirts, even when you have them cut like this, it looks like, oh, that is just going to be a mess. But then you actually get it together and it's like, oh, I kind of like that. All right, so this is my sashing. And you see how everything goes together. And then I use this for the cornerstones. And I like contrast. If you are afraid, I like bright and I like contrast. Everybody has their choice. I will tell you that if you're not really secure in your 1/4 inch, this is pinned crooked, but it matches. If you're really not all that comfortable with it, then you might not want these to be quite as stark of a contrast. You might want to have stuff that blends a little bit more. The reason I do, and you don't have to do cornerstones, the reason I do it is because it makes it easier. If you have cornerstones, then you have things to match against, and it's the easy way. As opposed to if you didn't have the cornerstones, then you would have to line your lines up, and which we all can do that. I've done it. This is just easier and quicker. All right, so that's the fabric, and I use 100% cotton. I will say that now I use quilt shop fabric. I didn't always, because we all start someplace, and I didn't always. And some of these, in fact, I'm pretty sure that's Walmart fabric. These pieces. This one hasn't been used as much, which means it hasn't been washed as much. It's probably only been washed once. I'm seeing that it has been washed because it's, puckered up. All right, okay, so we talked about sashing and cornerstones. I want to talk a little bit about, if you don't have a foot with a 1/4 inch foot with a guard on the side, it sure makes it nice. It's so easy to get your 1/4 inch, and you can just, breeze through it. So I'm a big believer in these, and I figured that every quilter already had these, knew all about it. And then one of my very dear friends that I go on retreat with, and she's faster than I am, and she just gets stuff done. I was sewing next to her a few weeks ago, and she said, oh no, she sat down, we were making a charity quilt, and I sewed for a while, and then she sat down and used my machine, and she said, wow, that's a really nice foot. I said, what do you mean a really nice foot? Don't you have one of those feet? And she didn't have one, and she's been a quilter way longer than I have. So I think she now has one. I have one for all my machines. The other thing that I believe in strongly is sewing on and off. This is just a piece of scrap that is folded in half, and I sew on and off it. I chain piece as much as I can, but there's always a place where you can't quite, or that you come to the end and you have to stop. So I use this to sew on and off, and with this, the weight of the t-shirts, especially after they've been stabilized, is thicker than your cotton fabric. So if you try to start and stop without something like this, or else starting in a little bit and backstitching, which I don't backstitch unless it's the very end. If I'm going to cross it again, I don't backstitch. That's my rule. So like when I sew the sashing on the first time, well, I'm going to cross it again when I do this sashing. So I don't backstitch. But if I didn't have this little piece of fabric, I would have to backstitch because the weight will catch it down in your throat plate. So that's a tip that I really use all the time. Something else I was going to say about the stitching. Okay, before I go on, I'm going to talk about the embellishing part. When you saw the embroidery purse stuff that I did on Gwen's quilt, and the other thing is you can applique. The ones I did recently, they had a couple of them had like a little logo, something like with a year or with a something on it, that like on the back, but then they had the big part that they wanted was on the front. And so but they wanted this little piece, and so I cut those out big and I stabilized them, raw edged them, and then I put them on and zigzagged them. So I appliqued them in some of the bare places, and they were thrilled. So that's one way to fill up some of your space. The other way, this is just regular quilting fabric, and I put Wonder Under on, heat and bond Wonder Under being my favorite. Anyway, you put that on, and then of course you can trace your design, or if you've got a go cutter, they're really fun, they're really fast. So that's what I did, was I ran a bunch of this stuff through the go cutter, and then I had a variety and I played with it. And then there was the edges, because I had these pieces that I cut so that they'd be big enough for that one flower, and I put the Wonder Under on it, and then I ran it through the cutter, and then I had bits and pieces left over. So some of these, do you see this one? That's just a circle that I drew around the bottom of the spool and cut it out, and then I have some circles. So I hate to waste stuff. So when I'm done, this is going to be all empty. So you can applique it on with anything. I chose to use this green variegated. I love variegated. This is not embroidery variegated. This is regular thread. So it's got the regular weight. Embroidery thread, is lighter weight. And I have variegated in that too. But because this is t-shirt fabric, it's got more heft to it, and especially after you've stabilized it. So I used this, and the reason I chose, black would have been great. Any plain color would have been great. But I chose green because I wasn't putting leaves on it, and green, flowers, leaves. So I used green on all of them. I appliqued them before I ironed them on, and then I appliqued them down prior to putting them in with the sashing. So that's another idea. These are my leftovers. So these, look at that. We'll probably do something. I don't know what. I don't have to decide right now. I could put a lot on. I'm not going to put this many on because that looks cluttered. I started putting more on. This was the first one I did, and I liked it fine. But some of these were bigger, and so I didn't want to take away from the t-shirt by putting too much decoration on it. And this one, Do you see this? It says maker. That's all that was on that t-shirt. So it was a little bitty logo. And so I added these blocks, these squares, and I added some flowers. And I put it opposite this one that already had squares on it. Do you see that? So that's the way you do that. And this goes right here. I run them through my machine by putting also all the right sides on, like that. And then I'll go back and I'll put the extra one on here. And then I'll sew them all together. But that's the other thing I want to tell you. This particular interfacing, it does not slide on your on the bed of your sewing machine. It's almost like it's got glue on it, which it doesn't, but it doesn't slide. So I like to put it down like this, and I use these big pins. I like my finer pins mostly for quilting, but for these, because the fabric's a little heavier, I like these bigger ones. And of course, I seldom pin, but I'm doing this just because you guys are special. But so I think I saw it on Fons and Porter. They said they finger pin. That's what I finger pin, pin. So, but if you'll get it on there where you want it and then turn it over this way and let the sashing be next to the machine bed, it'll go right through and you won't have any trouble. And I just, run them all through at the same time. And then I use my little scrap. So it goes like this. And then when you've got these all sewn on, you're going to press all of your seams towards the sashing. And that makes everything lock. Because if you see, we're going to go towards the sashing, and that's the lightest weight. So of course, to reduce bulk, that's why we do this. We always go to reduce bulk. So we're pressing towards the sashing because it's lighter weight than the middle. But then in order for them to lock together, we're gonna, when we do the cornerstones, we're also going to iron towards the sashing. So towards the sashing, and it locks together so that, you see that? So I've got, those are going that way, this one's going this way. So we reduce the bulk. All right. Did this. All right. So you've got an inside border already kind of automatically done with the sashing that you're putting on. These two rows are already sewn together on this sample. This top is not sewn together. You see, these are all separate, and the top is not sewn on either. So I'm going to put everything together. So all 9 blocks, all the sashing, all the cornerstones, and then I'm going to put the border on. Oh, I cut my sashing and cornerstones 3 inches. So I've tried it different. I've tried 2.5 because that's such a standard size. I've tried 2.5. I've tried 3.5. I really like 3. So obviously you can do whatever you want, just make it consistent. And so these are 3 inches and it's the same length. We cut the blocks 15. So you're going to cut your sashing the same. So it's 15, 15, everything's the same because we're doing the ones that go this way first, and then the end we'll do these. But so this is 15, and then these are cut 3.5 square, 3 square. So 15, 3. And like I said, it depends on what size your blocks are. You can go smaller, you can go bigger. Doesn't matter. And remember, you're going to have a seam allowance on whatever you do. So this ends up at like 2.5 if you cut it at 3. So then borders. I always do the side borders first, and some of you probably do it differently, but I always do the side borders first. And I'll lay this out on my big layout table, and I will take my border fabric and I will put it across the very middle and cut my two side borders at the same time. And then I'll sew them on. I'll press them out. The seams go out, and then I will put it back on my table, and I'll measure through the middle and cut 2 of them, and that's my top and my bottom, because that's my lazy way of doing borders. I learned that probably 25 years ago on Alex Anderson's show with Mary Ellen Hopkinson. Was it Hopkinson or Hopkins? Anyway, she was my kind of lady. She did everything. It looked great, but she did everything the easy way. And I learned a lot from her. So I've done it that way forever. Now, quilting. My theory is that it needs to be long-armed, but obviously not all of you want to do that. These generally, if they're a memory quilt of some sort, they're well loved and people want to use them. They will last longer if you send it out to a long armor. Otherwise, I would suggest that if you're going to quilt it on your home machine, that you put more. You don't want to just stitch in the ditch or echo stitch, because that's not going to be enough quilting. You're gonna need some, through the middle, that kind of stuff. So you'll have to decide. And I don't remember if I said this was a front and this was a back, or this was a back and this was the front and this was the back. So that's also what I did, to use both of them. And you see I used the same fabric as the border, but it's in the middle so it doesn't fight with it. And the other thing I wanted to tell you was in your placement. I want to talk a little bit about placement. I like to spread out my colors. Do you see that? See my greens? I've got all the greens here. I've got my grays that are the same color of gray. And then I've got, these are the deepest of the red and the pink, and then the orange. You see, there's kind of a symmetry. And don't worry about it if it doesn't work that way. Do the best you can. And one way you can tie them all together again is by adding some embellishments of some sort. When I do a 12 t-shirt quilt, this is the position I always ask my clients. I always say, so which is your favorite quilt, or your favorite t-shirt? Because this is the position, second row, middle. That's the position that you want to put the one that's your favorite. It's the one that your eye just goes to immediately. So that's the spot, all right, for the favorite. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter a lot. I just like it to look balanced. But if you have a design wall, if you don't, use your king size bed, use your floor, use whatever you've got, because you've got to lay it out and kind of look at it. This is like the last thing. I have this book, T-shirt Quilts Made Easy. You're not going to learn anything else from this than what I've already told you, but it does have some ideas of different things. Like this, look, isn't that a cute pillow with just one? So that's kind of a fun thing. And it's got some different layouts. So I do like this book. I just haven't really used it a lot. I bought it because I thought, well, some clients might want to see the choices. Well, the ones that call me up, because I don't really advertise anymore, it's just word of mouth. And the ones that call me up, they usually have seen one made like this, and that's what they like. I will tell you in closing that I made 2 t-shirt quilts for a friend of, actually she's the age of my kids, and she grew up on our block in California when we lived there, and she lost a 2-year-old baby, and I asked her if she would like for me to make her a memory quilt, and she sent me the little girl's clothes, and I made 2 memory quilts, one for her and one for my friend that's the grandma. And all the way as I was making it, it was very emotional for me because I knew the family so well. And, you know, I just prayed for her comfort the whole time I was working on it. And it was kind of, I don't know, it was good for me. It was good for them. So when you have the opportunity to make a memory quilt for somebody, it does become really special. I've done several. That was the most meaningful, but I've done quite a few for people who like their spouse has passed away and they want a quilt made from their clothes. And you can mix. It doesn't have to be all t-shirts, because if you have woven shirts, you could make one of the squares, or multiple of the squares can be woven shirts too. They don't have to be stabilized, and it can go right in. They just have to be cut, you know, the same size so they all fit. All right, so that's pretty much what I have, Denise, and I'm sorry I meant to stop a couple times and I just kept going.
That's okay. I got a couple of questions for you. So the first one was a little while back. It was on color catchers. Can you explain a little bit more about color catchers, what they do and where you would get those?
Okay. You get them in the grocery store, or in my case, Walmart, in the laundry section. And what they do is you just throw them in. I throw them in the washing machine, and then I also throw them in the dryer. And if something's going to bleed, I don't know what the chemical, I don't know why, I don't know anything about, you know, that kind of science, but it catches the color. And it's interesting because I saw just on the weekend, I saw that art class, and she had used color catchers that she used them in her art, because they come out all kinds of different colors. I did one and it turned out gray because it had, you know, black and navy blue shirts, and one of the quilts I did, it was red because it had red and pinks and stuff like that in it. So if it's gonna bleed, this is gonna catch it. Now, speaking of bleeding, my other thing that helps a lot is Oxiclean. So I use that if I think that something's going to bleed, or chances are good that it's going to bleed. Number one, I don't do hot water, but I do warm, because if it's going to bleed, I want it to go ahead and do that, but I don't force it by using hot. And I'll put that Oxiclean in and the color catcher, and I've never had any trouble. So, but if for some reason you take it out of the washer and something has bled, I think you all know, don't put it in the dryer. You know, deal with it then, wash it again, put more Oxy in it, whatever you need to do. So, okay, does that answer it?
Yep, I think that's great. So just want to verify that you use 1/4-inch seams on your quilts, correct?
Yes, that's why I have that 1/4-inch foot that I love. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there was a couple of questions, just wanting to make sure that they understood that correctly. Someone asked about raw edged. You said you raw edged them. What do you mean when you say raw edged them?
Okay, good question. All right, so these are, they came out of the Go Cutter, and they still have the paper Wonder Under on it. I score it with my, and just a tip on this kind of stuff, don't try to take it off right away. It needs to sit for like at least 30 minutes to an hour, or it'll still, you'll peel the glue off with the paper. So I peeled the paper off. Okay, so now I'm gonna iron it on. Where's my, I had that quilt. Yeah. So now I would take this and I would iron it on. And by raw edge, it just means that you're not, applique, you've heard of needle turn, you turn it under, you turn on under the edges, and then you don't have a raw edge. This is a raw edge. And if it did not have stable, if it didn't have this Wonder Under on it, it would fray really easily. But because it's got the Wonder Under on it, it doesn't fray very badly. So in fact, I mean, you see that it's not going, but it's raw edge. It's just the raw edge of the fabric. It's not turned under. And then I just iron that on.
Do you ever stitch around those, Cindy?
Did I what?
Do you ever stitch around those?
Oh yeah, I stitch around them always.
Okay.
That's, I used this particular one. On this, I used that variegated green thread.
Okay.
And you can use any decorative stitch you want. I did this one. I did with the typical blanket stitch that is usually used for applique. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to have more fun than that. And so this is on my machine. It looks like a little lightning bolt, and that's what this one is. And it's I kind of liked it because it reminded me of like the leaves were rough, which of course this is a flower, not a leaf, but remember I put the green on it because I was too lazy to put leaves on. So that was all my thinking on that. So anything, it doesn't matter, but you want to do the applique. If you're going to do applique, you want to do it before you set it into the whole quilt, because you know, it's much easier to turn this in your machine than to turn the whole quilt. So, and this is definitely not required that you do this. This is just another thing you can do, just like piecing like this. That's another thing you can do. You don't have to. All right, what else?
Okay. All right. So someone, just to make sure, so if you cut a square that's 15.5 by 15.5, you'll end up with a 15-inch block, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Someone also asked, what's the best stitch length?
Yeah, when I turn my computerized sewing machine on, that's the best stitch length. It's about 2.5, you know, it's, yeah, just regular. There's no reason to go down.
Yeah. And then the next question is, do you need to use a knit needle when joining blocks or machine quilting?
No.
No. Okay.
And the reason you don't need to do that is because you've stabilized it.
Okay.
And remember, if you're not comfortable with your stitching and your consistency, or your machine isn't as consistent or whatever, I strongly recommend that you use the woven iron-on. It's more expensive, but it's going to give you more flexibility, because once this is ironed on, this stuff, it doesn't move. So there's no easing in. You have to be you have to cut accurately, and you have to sew accurately. Which, I mean, it depends on, I told you, when I was when I was first started this, I really needed that woven so that I had a little bit of flexibility, but I've moved beyond that now. So everybody has to start where they are.
Right. It makes perfect sense. Someone also wanted to know the width of your borders.
Oh, good question. Thank you. When I first started doing these, the earlier ones, I cut at 6.5. And then I went down to 6. And now I'm down to 5. I cut it at 5. And I've been doing this for a few years now that I've cut it down to 5. It depends on what you want. I mean, if you want it to scream at you, the borders, but I decided that by putting 5 inches, it framed it, but it still leaves the t-shirts as the central part of your quilt. But like Glenn's, I think it was cut at 6.5 or 7. But that's been that's probably the last one I did that was that big. And Eli's that I just did this summer, I think I cut it at 3 because, you know, it's whatever you want. No, it's fine.
Okay, that's all the questions I have in the chat box for you, Cindy. So thank you very much. Wow. I have a couple of tubs of t-shirts I need to get busy and work on. So thanks for the inspiration. That really helps.
Awesome.
Before I let everybody go, the next class is scheduled for August 25th, and Mary Pacey is going to do the Drunkard's Path. And we're hoping, fingers crossed, that we can do it in person. If not, we will try and come up with Zoom or something else. But same time, 6 p.m. My office professional said she'd have it up by the end of the week, so you can sign up for August. So
I also have another class coming up on the jelly roll pillow, the strips. So that's when is that September? It's coming up one of those times.
I think so. Yes.
Hope to see you all there. It's easy. I hope we can do it in person because it's way more fun. Yeah.
Yes. Hopefully we can do some things in person with proper social distancing, of course. But, you know, if not, we've got this as backup. So anyway, thanks,
Excellent.
Cindy. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.